Good evening and welcome to this special discussion. This evening we're examining one of the hot button issues currently in the local media, and that has to do with the relations between Guyana and the United States. I have with me in studio this evening the Honorable Priya Manickchand, the Minister of Education, of course, executing the functions of Foreign Affairs Minister in the absence of the Honorable Caroline Rodriguez-Burkett, and of course Madame Gail Teixeira, the Presidential Advisor on Governance and the Chief Whip of the government in the National Assembly. Ladies, it's a pleasure to have you.
Well, it's very nice to be here.
Like I said, the relations between the U.S. and Guyana seem to be one of the hot button issues currently consuming the local media and to some extent the regional media. Over the past couple of weeks or probably months, we have seen the kind of controversy that is surrounding the current U.S. ambassador, who is almost on his way out of Guyana. His tour of duty is almost to an end. But we have seen a number of issues, him being the common denominator in quite a number of controversies. The topping, if you want to call it that, or the icing on the cake, happens to be his recent address to the Blue Caps, and of course the event he hosted a few nights ago with regards to the 4th of July celebrations in the U.S. Minister Manickchand, you would have been performing the functions of Foreign Affairs Minister, would have represented the government, made a presentation on behalf of the government at that function. But first, before we get into that and what happened and all that happens after that, I wanted to talk a little about the relationship between Guyana and the United States, bearing in mind these recent controversies, including the lead project and so forth. What is the relationship like? Because a lot of people are getting the impression or being told to some extent that there is some strained relationships between the two countries. You're going to go first, Mr. Shearer.
Our relations with the relations between Guyana and the United States have been good. We have had over the last several years the improvements in our relations in terms of security sector. For example, we have the announcement this week of the DA office being established here, which is something we have been talking for a long time with the U.S. Since I was Minister of Home Affairs, that was on the card, and that's what we were talking about then. So I believe that there are a number of areas where there have been good relations, there's been progress. There are also areas where obviously both countries have different national interests and where sometimes those views collide. And in Minister Manichand's speech, he referred to the FATCA, the foreign account issue, where the American government took a decision, they passed laws in which American citizens in other parts of the world, the banks will declare their incomes for inland revenue, etc., declarations and taxation in the United States. And the point that was made in her speech was that this is not something any of our countries in the developing world were consulted about, but we have to comply with. So there are those issues where the interests collide that are differences of views. But in terms of, and of course, with, in particular, this ambassador, the area where there was great controversy, and it was very public, was the U.S. LEAD project, where the conventions and norms that had been developed between the Guyana and the United States were suddenly not in operation, and that a project was created and presented to the government, which the government objected to. And objected to it, one of the main areas that it objected to was the issue of political financing of political parties. That's where it began. The fact that we went through these years where Guyana, as a little country, stood up and said, no, we're not going to allow this. Any project has to be with the Guyana government's compliance and agreement, and that eventually it was almost over a year that there was no movement. In fact, despite the position of the Guyana government and its report to the U.S. Secretary of State and all the procedures we went through, they still brought in a chief of mission for USAID who actually got, I think, harmed the relations or the relations between the government and the USAID in relation to what his activities were, to the point where the Guyana said we weren't revoking his work permit. And then, of course, finally, the U.S. administration from Washington decided that to pause the project and to return to the table. And two of the components were worked out between Dr. Luncheon and the U.S. ambassador to the satisfaction of both, which upheld the position the government had been saying all the time. If we sit down together and we work together, we can reach agreement on a number of areas. And everyone was saying to us up to a month before Washington said, yes, pause and let's go back, they'll agree to come back to the table with us. Everybody was saying, in the press that is, not necessarily the ordinary Guyanese people, that you shouldn't take on the American government. They're too big, they're too powerful, why are you doing that? And we showed, as a country standing on principle and on mutual respect, that we could get back to the table and resolve a number of issues. And so I'm using it as an example of where there were very strong differences with the ambassador, and also even with the way in which the project was designed. So that what evolved later on was obviously an accumulation of problems with the ambassador in particular, and this ambassador, that's the outgoing ambassador, that led to what had finally transpired. And that despite many discussions at the highest level with the president, with the ambassador, of our concerns, our deep not only concerns, but annoyance, irritation, frustration with some of the comments he was making publicly about our country and about our government, that he proceeded. And so what happened on July 4th night is not a one-off and the government suddenly decided to be a bully in the China shop, was that the government had had enough. He had crossed the red line, as Minister said. And so I want to make a distinction that although our relations have been good, the last 3 years have not been easy for us, but we have stuck to our principles, and in fact, with U.S. lead, it showed that we were right.
But I just want to say, we are not unclear in the cabinet or in the government about our relations with the U.S. We are friends with the United States of America. Guyana is friendly with the United States of America. We consider them a partner, and we believe they consider us a partner. But like any other good relationship, even in homes and families and friendships, there are things you disagree on, and there are things that you might not always have the same view on. There are ways, civil ways, in which you get around those disagreements. A disagreement cannot possibly mean that the entire relationship has broken up. And in fact, we believe that if we were to take the lead project, let me just say in summary, Gail just said most of what it was, but in summary, here's a project that the U.S. and Guyana were working on. Guyana had problems with the lack of consultation with the Guyana government, so you can't have two partners and one decide I'm going to go get married and leave the other one behind and not check with the other one to see if they're going to walk along to the altar. And then when you get to the altar, you expect that this person is just going to turn up. That's never really going to happen. And so where we had problems was with the ambassador saying, going ahead with the project in Guyana, saying, we are not happy with this, we're not comfortable with it, we need to iron out some of these difficulties. And the United States representative saying, well, I don't care what your difficulties are, we are proceeding. And this was the representative of the United States of America. And we objected. And when our objections reached the ambassador, or he ignored all of our objections all along, but when they reached his bosses at the State Department and wherever else, they, understanding the relationship of our good partnership and our friendship, halted the program and then ordered that we get back to the table, that he get back to the table with us and talk. And we did talk, and now we have announced that now that we're both comfortable with where this program is, we're going to go ahead. So we are not unclear about whether we're friends or partners with the U.S. We are, and we believe the United States understands that too, which is why they told him, hold up, get back to the table and do this the way you should have done it in the first place, observing all the conventions and norms that professional diplomats really should. So that's answering your question about what are our relations. We have great relations with the U.S., and we will have differences with the way they treat our country sometimes, and even with the way they treat other countries sometimes. I don't think that means the partnership or love dissolves immediately.
Clearly, based on your response, our relationship with the United States as a country is excellent or good at this point in time. I'm seeing an issue here of an individual, one person, because if you were to go back prior to the 3 years, I can't recall really any much controversy of this nature existing with any U.S. ambassador here. And it started, and you made the point of Guyana objecting to the lead project and him saying, well, fine, that's your business. I'll do what I have to do. I'll go ahead and implement.
Rogue.
So in terms of diplomatic norms, the boundaries of an ambassador operating in a country, is what the ambassador is doing, is it fitting into that kind of definition?
This ambassador, in my respectful view and in the view of the cabinet, has breached repeatedly all the norms and conventions that govern how countries relate to each other through their diplomatic channels. And you are right. We have said, both Gail and I, that we have no problems with the U.S. We don't think the U.S. thinks we have problems with them. This is about a person who holds himself out and who has been sent to represent the United States. And I think that person understands that it's about him. He has said in response to some of the issues, I think I read somewhere where he said that this was a personal attack, and indeed it was. It was a repudiation of the behavior of this individual over the last 3 years, particularly over the last year and a half, where we've been talking about some of the things that are offensive to us as a nation, and he's just completely ignored us. So it is about our objections to the United States ambassador, and like we said, we want to make sure that we preserve this friendship by fixing this diversion, this rogue behavior, making sure that we don't send a message by our silence or by our acquiescence, that we don't in any way acquiesce to this kind of behavior and then rob the people of Guyana of their right to sovereignty, their right to determine what will happen in the country. And it is, this for us was the red line, like we said. This ambassador has crossed that line, and we wanted to make it very clear, which we did through our representations on the night of the 2nd, that this kind of behavior is not going to be something that will be tolerated by the Guyana government, by the Guyana administration, by the people of Guyana, as far as it relates to our relations with our partners through diplomatic channels or otherwise.
Yeah, just to add to that, the normal conventions that apply for ambassadors, diplomats serving in another country is one of mutual respect and recognizing the sovereignty of each country and recognizing not to interfere in the internal politics of a given country, at least publicly. They may be doing it otherwise. But the issue that here was an ambassador who was going to the public, and in his most recent statement, but there's a whole dossier on statements he's made several places. On the U.S. lead, he made a number of comments accusing Dr. Lunch and other people of basically lying and making very disparaging comments of the government. We didn't take him up at that time. But the fact that...
We didn't take him up publicly, but we did speak to him behind closed doors.
Exactly.
Numerous times. These were things that were brought to his attention from the highest level that said we are unhappy with this, because I see some people saying, oh, you know what, resolve this. I think it was the private sector that said, don't go in public and talk about this. Resolve this behind closed doors.
But he's not doing it. He's not raising these concerns behind closed doors.
Two things. Well, good.
He's doing it in public.
So we have two things. One, that he did this first. We responded, but that's not really a good answer. You know, if you slap me, I slap you back. Maybe we'll end up in a fight. But the second thing is, so he was breaching all the norms and raising things in public that he should have done behind closed doors. And secondly, these issues were addressed with this ambassador behind closed doors repeatedly. And he has been a repeated offender in breaching the norms and breaching the conventions, the latest one being on Monday, when he addressed a young NGO a group of young people, and we always encourage our young people to not only partake but to organize and get together and partake so that they can partake effectively. And in addressing that young forum, that NGO, he practically hijacked the People's Forum and launched an attack on the executive president of this state, and in effect, every single citizen of this state. He attacked President Ramatar. He laughed at General Secretary Clement Rohi. He mocked the PPP. So let me tell you in effect what that means. When you go out there and you attack a president, he attacked every single citizen of this country. When you laugh at the General Secretary and mock him and make him out to be somebody who is less than worthy of respect, then you just disrespected every single member and supporter of the People's Progressive Party. All the women from the WPO or who support or work with the WPO, all the young people of the PYO who work and or support the PYO, all the men who've sweated and given blood to make sure this country is where it has that support the PPP. You've just mocked them all, and that's just unacceptable. And while we're talking on the issue of diplomacy and whether he was being a professional diplomat, this is someone who accused the president of being inconsistent and doing illegal things and referred to the president as unconstitutional and illegal things, and said, I think somewhere here, I'm just going to read this, and this is a direct quote from him that I have not seen him deny, but he cannot be an inconsistent defender. And then he goes on at another point where he says he advised Parliament that he did not. Who is he? Is this ambassador? A Foreign Service office speaking of the executive president of a country? Is that diplomacy? Is that diplomatic? Did he really stay within the norms? Because people are saying it wasn't diplomatic and it wasn't becoming of us, and we weren't exercising diplomacy when we spoke to him harshly at his home. But I'll come to that in a minute.
Is located in Guyana, by the way.
Well, I'll come to that in a minute.
Because
but there are 2 points here. One,
issue.
A professional diplomat never refers to the president of a country as he. It's usually His Excellency the President, the Honorable President, something. So he has not been diplomatic. Secondly, if the objection seems to have been too that we went to his residence and made this objection. We objected to his behavior at his residence. He is in our home, and he's calling our president he, and being disrespectful in our home. So let's take this in perspective. And I don't believe necessarily that tit for tat is always good, but I would like to see where some of these groups who are now rising up to speak, where were they when these things were publicly happening? And I don't think, we can forgive them for not speaking, but I'd like to see activism going forward, holding everybody accountable for, if you want diplomatic relations and you want diplomacy to be upheld, then we must be universal in our application of calling for these things.
But just to the issue of some of the things he actually said. I mean, he is quoting the papers, and he hasn't denied any of these issues. This purposeful delay after 20 years without elections, it bears repeating, contrary to the constitutional laws in Guyana. This ambassador and the government has been at pains and has exerted enormous energy in explaining and talking to the ambassador on issues, for example, on local government. The use of the adjective purposeful delay then therefore is accusing us of deliberately preventing, and there's some sinister act behind what we're doing. And then he goes on further to talk about the fact that it's unconstitutionally illegal. And then further, he goes on to then basically say that the president has manipulated situations such as an extent that by not signing the bill by a certain time, then elections couldn't be held. He has been advised that the bill he keeps quoting is the date for the elections, that he's got it all wrong. But he continued to say this publicly, and of course Monday, and he repeated it on Wednesday night. No diplomat worth their salt, particularly an ambassador, goes out on a limb like this. One had to wonder, seeing a number of his public statements, but most particularly these, was whether he was running for election in Guyana. If he was the head of a political party in Guyana, there's nothing that we could say except we'd take them on as equal political leaders and challenge each other. But this was an ambassador of another country who was insulting and actually accusing the president of sinister motives, actually, and of unconstitutional behavior and illegal behavior. These are not things that generally an ambassador would do. And the fact that the government said, look, we've had enough of this, and he's leaving tomorrow. So the point that people have raised that we should have taken it up behind quietly, one, it was done, and done several times. But also, he just felt that he was above anything, and that we are not going to tolerate this. This is not acceptable in any country. And in fact, regrettably, in Latin America, a number of ambassadors, including those from the United States, have had similar problems with government where they've crossed the red line. They have got involved in, not only this ambassador got involved with making accusations against the president and so on, but he also got involved in local politics. And those are things that really are, in the bilateral arrangements, is to assist countries, and what you don't agree with, you back off one, but not to get where he was calling for, and in his speeches, both times he was inciting. On the speech on July the 4th, his reference to the American Revolution.
July 2nd.
July 2nd, Wednesday, was inciting people, basically saying, look, we had a revolution, and one of the reasons we had a revolution is that the King George didn't assent to bills.
They're not one. What he said. So this ambassador has been going around the country in all his speeches and so on, saying that the president, the PPP Civic government have not been doing A, B, C, D, E, whatever those are. He's listed them in his speech. For example, they have not assented to the local government bills. And then he says, in America, in 1776, when America was a colony of Britain, and Britain refused to do these same things, A, B, C, D, E, the American people took up arms and fought for their independence.
Yeah.
What are you saying? And then goes on later on to say, we'll be the wind behind your back, but you got to do this yourself. And that for us was very alarming. That was the ambassador, and we believe he was rogue. He went rogue on this matter. We do not believe this was supported by his administration, the President Obama's administration. We believe he went rogue when he practically called for an insurrection in this country.
Isn't this though reminding you of the U.S. actions in the past? When the PPP previously, years ago, would have won elections and be in office, because I can recall hearing the story about wanting to get Dr. Jagan out of power and so forth. I think it's in the 60s,
it's not even hearing about it. The U.S. has been great record keepers, and they have declassified many of those documents now, so we're not in doubt anymore. Things that people like Gail and the persons who were there at the beginning knew or thought they knew about, they knew, but they had nothing to confirm it. We've now confirmed as a world that there were external forces that prevented democracy in Guyana. And because that democracy was prevented, our growth as a people, as a country, as a nation was retarded. And we know that now. So these are, but like I said, we've all built our relations over the years, and we have come to a place now where we are sovereign. The U.S. is supposed to understand that sovereignty and what it means, and that we will work along being partners, supporting each other and trying to make each other's country and the people in those countries better.
But I think you mentioned one of the comments he made. I think it's very serious with regards to talking about a revolution, and in essence saying, if you do that, the U.S. is going to back you. This is a diplomat who should be examining diplomatic issues.
This was a diplomat, and this is another thing. This was a diplomat speaking at an event that people say, it was just a send-off. It was a celebration. Why did the government take him on at a send-off and a celebration? He said that at his send-off, at his celebration. He's the person that brought up these very controversial issues yet again. But this is a controversial ambassador who has done this repeatedly, and just continued on that night. He didn't stop on that
But even
night.
he wasn't satisfied. I mean, he had to have a last lick, because yesterday he had a press conference where he made the comment that, and he's embracing the warmth of the Guyanese people and the wrath of the Guyanese people when they don't agree with the views. And this was in reference to the way people treated Minister Priya Manickchand at the reception when she spoke.
And he's embracing that.
And it was, when you read the paragraph, he was actually delighted. You could see the delight in the language that was used, that, these people that we've been working with, these youth organizations we've been working with, that, we embrace them. And here they are, they could show their wrath against the persons they don't agree with. Now, all of this is doublespeak. We're talking about democracy. And his whole speech was based on democracy and equal treatment of citizens and everything else. But in his own home, when someone had a different view, the same organizations that they've cultivated, nurtured, funded, many of those leaders hit back and showed they had intolerance to any view other than what was the American line or what was the ambassador's line. And the issue is what was shocking at the reception, here are Guyanese, and some of them are Guyanese in high positions or influential positions, who were shouting and saying, "Take away your visa."
Yeah.
I mean, this is to me as a Guyanese,
It's just disgusting.
and having grown up in the anti-colonial struggle, so I'm much older than Priya, I can be a mother, that having grown up in this anti-colonial struggle for independence, this identity of who we are as a people, and the Union Jack comes up and the arrowhead goes up, and there's this bursting of your chest of who you are as a people. And here, 40-odd years later, there are people in an audience who are saying, by shouting, that take away your visa is, of course, because you get an American visa, you have to kowtow, you have to be subservient.
Yeah.
This is to me, a sad reflection on if this is the perspective of these so-called, some of them are politicians, because we saw who were some of the persons heckling.
We're going to talk about
and these are political leaders who want government.
We're going to talk about the crowd just now, those who were present and who responded.
But I do want to...
Before we go to that, I want us to talk, too, while you were making that presentation, of course, I listened to the presentation, and
I think it was superb.
You did said in that presentation, you did laud the U.S. government for assistance to the security forces, to Guyana, etc., etc. But as we say in local terms, you call a spade a spade. You said it the way you saw it. And you heard the kind of outburst from the people there. Now, as a diplomat in your home, nothing was said by the ambassador to say, okay, this is the wrong thing you're doing, allow the minister to speak.
Well, a true believer and lover of democracy would have said, but hold on, I have said what I have to say. Allow the minister to say what or allow the people of Guyana to speak through the minister, because that's what democracy is. We might disagree, but we have this right to speak, this thing we're born with.
No, but he couldn't prevent himself, because when minister finished speaking on behalf of the government of Guyana, it wasn't Minister Manickchand suddenly waking up and decides she wants to have a broadside against the ambassador. She was representing the president and the government of this country. He came back to the mic and said, what a send-off, and he wanted to repeat and reiterate his position on local government.
Which, again, is breaching protocol.
So, I mean, this was unheard of. This is, diplomats are very formalistic, very much about structure and procedures and stuff like that. So that, but at no point did he take the mic and say, okay, guys, as you said, let's hear what the minister has to say. I'm all right. I'm cool with this.
But I wanted to, that's why I smiled when Gail said the ambassador spoke with glee of the wrath of the people of Guyana. It would be foolhardy to assume that your invitees, who are most likely your friends, represent the views of the people of Guyana. We can hardly take, first of all, it is noteworthy that not everybody at that reception was heckling and or booing.
The majority weren't.
But I was speaking, Gail was observing, but I can tell you that having left the reception, I received messages from persons who were at the reception. One came through a person that said, I felt pride in my country. So there were many people, because of the presentation the government made, there were many people not heckling.
Yeah.
So this impression being created that everybody was heckling, that's not true. What happened is the louder, the bullies, they drowned out what else was happening, and the impression is that people are trying to paint, the people who have an agenda, is that this was happening with everyone. That is simply not true. There are people who are going to be watching your program who were there, who knew that they were not heckling, and they were actually pleased that we were speaking. Secondly, to assume that this grouping that the ambassador had there, persons who are never going to be supportive of the government, they are haters. They would do anything to see us out of office and to see us even worse, injured. So you had Mark Benchcop. We could give a liver and he's not going to cheer. He's probably going to heckle. Nigel Hughes, no friend of the government. I mean, he has this deep hatred for all of us. Anand Gulsaran declared himself a long time ago enemy of the administration.
Yeah. Hamilton Green.
Hamilton Green, we don't need to go further. These are the kinds of people you had heckling. The Starbuck News captured by photographically some of the persons who were heckling, and I wouldn't go as far as to say that everyone who heckled is not a friend of the government or is not interested in what government does, because sometimes people get caught up in the moment, but the majority of persons who heckled were never friends of the government. I'm surprised by one or two names because they hold themselves out to be friends, my friends. And so, I was a little odd, and I wouldn't have held them to be people who would try to bully a person who was speaking and take away from that person their democratic right to speak.
But he does talk about freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and
but
clearly
not,
that wasn't an opportunity.
So not everybody was there,
freely.
but this wrath of the Guyanese people, and that's why I smiled when Gail said that. Look, me and I know some other colleagues from the cabinet, because people have called. We have received tons of calls. My office advised me that the phone has been ringing off the hook. And persons who called and are watching the program, you know yourselves, with calls of support. We've received messages, we've received letters. Today, a bouquet of flowers came with a note that said, great speech, thank you for making it. I just went to the salon because my hair was all a big mess. And before I came here, and someone there said very loudly, all the girls in the salon could hear, thank you for saying that. I agree with you, and if I were there, I would have been cheering you on. So all around, we've been getting this kind of support. So this belief of the ambassador that the people of Guyana are represented by this narrow group that he's surrounded himself by and with, he's sadly mistaken. Sadly mistaken. It's extremely encouraging for me, actually, that people feel so strongly about our sovereignty and felt so strongly. Like I said, one of the messages I got after that same night was that after a long time, I felt pride in my country that Guyana made this presentation. And so there are a lot of people, and they will be watching your program, around the country who followed. Some people just don't care. Yesterday, I went to Golden Grove. I met with over 1,000 parents and invited questions on anything under the sun, and nobody asked me about this. So for people in their ordinary lives, this is not the ambassador and what he does and what he says and how upset he is and how he gathers his friends around to make statements for him is not going to affect their everyday lives. But there are people who feel strongly about the fact that we represented Guyana and did that did that well and did that forcefully. And the forcefulness came after a repeated set of breaches by this particular ambassador that continued on that night.
I'm happy you clarify, and I realize you keep emphasizing the presentation by the government, because there was this whole talk about Priya Manickchand delivering a statement loaded with Priya Manickchand's views. Some people were caught up in this idea that the presentation was not a Government of Guyana presentation, but more a Priya Manickchand presentation. I heard you keep emphasizing over and over, both of you, it's a Government of Guyana presentation.
Can I give my response on that? And that is, I think it was always smokescreen. I believe that it was a smokescreen to divert from what was the real issue, to make Priya, one, the target, so that Priya comes out as the bad person.
Satire.
You know, and one of the political parties, AFC, talked about satire gal.
Which
now,
is
if I know if I have remembered the Creole song correctly, the reference to Priya as a satire gal is racist, it's sexist.
But it's coming really from the AFC. So
and it's really saying that, you know, basically, and I'll say it because she can't say it, is that Indian women in this country must know their place. They mustn't come out of their confines and suddenly be out there speaking. And if we look historically at which women have been targeted, and unfortunately the women movement in this country doesn't defend them, but a lot of the women who've been targeted in the media and by opposition parties have been majority Indo-Guyanese women. And I can start to name them. Soba, the town clerk, the Gitanjali Singh, Minister Ashni's wife, Priya, for example, that these are the women, and they, even with one of the key ranking persons in the judiciary, what you call the registrar, was targeted. No one opened their mouth to defend them on the opposition. So I have very strong views on this, that one was to try to make Priya Manickchand the fall guy in all of this, or fall girl in all of this. And the second thing was to create a smoke screen so that everyone was talking about whether she was diplomatic, whether she went beyond the call of diplomacy and blah, 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 and not any longer dealing with the crux of the matter was that the government had had enough, and here was an ambassador who crossed the red line. He had gone and violated what are issues of mutual respect, territorial integrity, and sovereignty. He'd repeatedly, he was a repeat offender. And that, the occasion that was used, he's leaving on July 6th. We've said this 100 times, but here it is, he's leaving. This is the last time. He'll go on a plane to July 6th or whenever, and we will close the door on that issue. But the smokescreen has been created in the media, social media, to make her the target. And so you see, even in the APNU statement, that President Ramaphosa should dissociate himself from Minister Manickchand's statement, as if suddenly, you know, she had no good. She suddenly get dressed up and go to the American embassy and lash out. This is absurd. This is absolutely absurd. But it's to denigrate the situation and to deal with the non-issues and not to deal with the main
while
issue.
we're on the issue, I would like, and like I said, forget the satire girl or whatever, very sexist remark made by the AFC, and they spoke of class, and it's really ironic. But forget that. I would like to ask them, and I would like to ask the APNU, how do you feel about the ambassador saying that, well, you know, we kind of know the answer to that because they want destruction, but how do you feel about the ambassador saying that if you don't get what you want, and if you don't get these things that you've been calling for, do what the U.S. did. We'll give you wind behind your back. And when we had those problems, this is what we did. We picked up arms and we went on the street. So we kind of know how they would respond to that. Put under pressure, journalists should ask them, how do you feel about this? Because I don't know if they can publicly say we'd like to see Regent Street burnt down and looted again, and I would think that the private sector and the Private Sector Commission may want to address that also, because they're the persons who suffer. I mean, all of Guyana suffers. All of Guyana suffers when you have a burning down and a looting, and you have to build back Regent Street instead of doing the Berbice Bridge, or build back Regent Street instead of building a school that is needed. We should ask these questions. How do you feel about this particular thing? But like Gail said, if you now start talking about whether it was Priya's speech or somebody else's speech or whatever,
then you get tone was right,
or whether my tone was right, forgetting the ambassador's tone and his speech, then you get into the place of ignoring these very alarming things that came out of. Forget his history. Let's say we wanted to wipe the slate clean and forgive him for all the past wrongs. Here on this night, here is an ambassador saying, when we had some of these same problems in the United States in 1776, we fought and got our independence from Britain. And Guyana, you will need, what is it? People must demand these things, because you're not going to get it. We will be here with you to help you and support you and put wind behind your back and give you space to talk, but you have to demand it. That is alarming. That is frightening for people. And if you get out, if the ambassador gets out of this small, narrow circle that he's built himself around where he can be comfortable, well, he's leaving now, fortunately. But if he went on the ground and found out how people feel about that statement, then he will understand why he should probably offer an apology to this country for saying that.
Do you think that will be forthcoming before?
No, I think he leaves, which is a good thing.
But surprisingly, let's say these issues that he would have raised are issues of national interest. There are other issues of national interest that I haven't heard the ambassador, and I think a lot of people, you talk with people out there, they would say, but why is he talking just about, while yes, we're talking we need local government elections and we need these things to happen, why is he just talking about that? And he's not talking about issues when other politicians, apart from those on the government side.
Well, let's take, Eddie, the issue of the money laundering bill, the anti-money laundering bill. I have no doubt that the ambassador may have spoken to the opposition political parties, but he's never publicly criticized the opposition parties or made any critical comment in relation to their role from preventing the bill from coming to the House and being stuck in committee. I don't recall him ever making that point. So the issue of here we are as a country when he's
and
making
he
his
shouldn't.
statements.
We are saying that he should not making broad calls, doing what's good for Guyana. Because look, if the anti-money laundering bill is not passed, this whole country will suffer. The people of Guyana will suffer. Businesses will suffer. Our development will be retarded. This growth we've seen in the economy for the last 8 years, the consecutive growth that we haven't seen for the last 20-something years, that is going to change. Whether we can give $10,000 to each child, that is going to change. Whether we can bring in secondary schools across this country for each child, that is going to change. Whether we can provide hospitals and services in hospitals where they're needed, that is going to be retarded. So this is a big issue. This is an important issue. I don't think there has been any reasonable, credible organization who did not call for everybody to do what they're supposed to do on this. If this ambassador was so very interested, and he was so very interested in, or he was unaware of what some norms are, and so that's why he's been breaching them. Let's say he was breaching them accidentally. Then he would have made the same comments and calls for leaders of the opposition parties, which he didn't do. So I have to think that this particular ambassador felt comfortable with targeting the president and the administration, and really got involved in meddling in our personal political affairs and made himself a supporter of the opposition. Because if he felt strongly about these matters and he felt like he could speak to anyone anyhow and he didn't know what the norms were, he would have been calling on Mr. Granger to get his act together and pass his bill. He would have been calling on Kemraj Ramjatan to, well, I'm not sure who's the leader of that party anymore. He would have been calling on whoever's the leader of the AFC to get your act together and pass this bill. But he didn't extend that treatment to them. He reserved it and repeatedly exploited it against the president, the PPP Civic, and the government. What does that say to you? And the role of ambassadors being in countries and countries being represented in partner countries and sister countries, and so it's to support the development and growth and investment and so on in those countries. And we need the passage of this bill because it's a worldwide thing. It's not something Guyana wants alone. It's, the world needs us to pass this if we're not to be punished for not passing it. Where was the ambassador on this? Now, I am saying very clearly that he should not have called on, or he should not have done anything that would have been interfering politically, even though it would have been against our opponents, because that is not his role. Just as how him interfering against us as a government, calling us illegal and unconstitutional, that is not his role. So he stepped over the red line. And we've made it very clear as a government that, we are very tolerant and we talk about these things and so, but we have a red line too. Like the ambassador's President Barack Obama said, there's a red line, and we have one too. And he crossed the red line when he attacked President Ramatar and the people of this country, and attacked Clement Rohi, the General Secretary of the biggest political party in this country. He crossed that line, and we wanted to make it very clear, as we said, that this behavior of this ambassador is not acceptable, and we wanted to also put out there very publicly that this kind of behavior will not be accepted by persons that the government and the people of Guyana share relations with, diplomatic relations with.
You were talking about the Minister Manickchand is very passionate about this issue.
No, I love it.
She's very passionate about this issue.
I love it.
But in terms of the way forward, I mean, this ambassador is out. Guyana would have learned something from all the controversies
I think, though, let me just point out one thing. This country has fought for free and fair elections for 28 years. Because of what was the interference in our struggle for independence, the support for an undemocratic regime, etc. And as Priya eloquently pointed out, we have paid the consequences, and we're still paying the consequences. Because one of the things in 1955, when the split was created by external forces, the split in the PPP, where the Burnham faction and the Jagan faction, those political scars are still in our country up to today. We haven't, the body fabric, the political fabric of our country was torn asunder in the 50s and 60s. And we have been spending 40 years trying to find ways to resolve it, to repair it back, to reconcile. And so we have paid the price. And the fact that, regrettably, this ambassador is not the only one who's been calling for local government elections. There are other ambassadors or high commissioners who have been involved in making public statements. The difference between the public statement on local government elections, which we are not happy about by those joint statements, the difference with this ambassador is that he crossed the line, because then he started to point the finger at the president and making accusations, and also then saying, and then getting involved with mobilizing, with actually mobilizing people in Guyana and support for them calling for local government elections. The issue of local government elections and GCOM, etc., and he was well aware of this, of issues that GCOM was not ready, GCOM is not ready, and in fact with local government elections, that the information as each political party that sits in GCOM, there are 6 members, commissioners, 3 for the opposition, 3 for the government party. And we know the inside information. We know that GCOM is not ready, that has not been able to deal with putting people into constituencies, people who've registered. In fact, several thousands of people were local government elections to have been called, as he is calling for. Thousands of Guyanese would have been disenfranchised. Thousands. And so we know what GCOM has to do, because our commissioners are there. They report to us as they report to APNU. And therefore, this whole view that the accusation at the Blue Caps meeting is that the president deliberately withheld, delayed withholding the assent to the bill,
and
so as to make sure, and by so doing, ensuring that local government elections could not be held by August the 1st, when in fact he knows that it's GCOM that has to set up the machinery. The government doesn't set up the machinery for local government elections. And the fact that we are aware of these issues. We're aware of these issues because on the local government election, people will vote in constituencies, the PR, the hybrid system of PR and first past the post. So the diplomats have put out joint statements, and it is not that they're unaware of some of these issues. So one has to question what is the political motivation, and therefore the issue of meddling in our affairs. Is it that they really want to have a local government elections where thousands of people are going to be disenfranchised? And don't we as a government have a responsibility to ensure that GCOM is able to do the work it's supposed to do and make sure that we have a clean voters list and that the voters have a right, every single citizen of Guyana, 18 and over, have the right to vote, whether it's in local government elections or national elections. And shouldn't we, as Guyanese, be able to decide when we want to have elections? The local government and the problems with local government are enormous and historical. And it cannot be said that it is President Ramatar's fault that that has happened. But the language that has been used, purposeful, the language, purposeful delay after 20 years, as if this PPP government for 20 years have deliberately prevented local government elections from being held. Yeah. And I could trace back the whole political accord with Corbyn and Hoyt and everybody going back over these years. And when we were ready in 2008 to go for local government elections, the fact was that there was a big discussion in office of the president with Mr. Corbyn, with President Jagdeo, with Mr. Surge Valley, with the diplomats, with the ABC EU countries, American, British, Canadian, and European, who came and witnessed the accord that was signed in 2008 to have the mother of all house-to-house registrations, because the PNC at that time decided the 206 election list, they didn't want that list anymore. We would go back to house, and this meant everything was deferred. And all these things, the details, when the house-to-house registration was finished for supposedly local government elections, then the opposition said, no, you have local government elections in 2010. The money was available in GCOM. Was it, no, if you're going to have, we're going to boycott. We want new legislation. We want these new bills to come in that are all related to post-electoral matters. Post-electoral matters of new. And it isn't that the diplomatic corps is unaware of these issues. We are being caught, and so the issue of being caught in between and betwixt. I would love to see local government elections in the country. Every member of the PPP leadership would love to see it, because we're confident that were that to happen again, we'd win back, just as we won, 60% of the NDCs the last time. We're confident we could do it again. But the issue is that if, under the new electoral system that we passed in the bill in 2009, that if every person is not on the right side of the street, in the right constituency, they will be disenfranchised. They can't vote. And so it's completely different from national elections. And so these issues are being fudged. First of all, you have an ambassador who goes out there and says, what we need is the people to demand local elections and push this government. This government is holding back. It's preventing this democracy from being taking place in this country and transforming this country. It is the government that's the problem. And in fact, you have a situation where GCOM is silently watching by, knowing that they have problems, knowing that they haven't complied with a number of things, and sitting there and watching the government take licks. And the ambassador is helping it out.
Yeah, and I want to make it very clear that I have absolutely no difficulty, and the government has no difficulty with persons calling for, I want as a citizen, I want local government elections as quickly as it can happen. We have these discussions frequently around the cabinet table, but forget me. I have absolutely no difficulty with Guyanese people as individuals or organized as groups calling for local government elections, writing letters, being scathing to the government if they want to, calling on us, calling on the opposition people to do what they have to do, calling on GCOM to get their act together. I have no problems with if NGOs want to do that, or young people want to do it, or people in the country feel that we need local government elections and feel that they need to do something more than just want it in their hearts. They need to mobilize to get it. I have no problems with that. That is their right. It is their right to advocate for what they want. We encourage that fully. I mean, I love seeing young people organized into groups for a cause, because it's hugely effective. It's a good expenditure of their time, and it's preparing them to be the leaders of Guyana. So I have no problems with that. What I have a problem with is a foreigner who comes down here and is sent down here as a foreign service officer, poses as a diplomat, and really flirts around Guyana's, well, more than flirts around Guyana's politics, inserts himself into the political activities of this country to the point where he has attempted to, unfortunately for him, unsuccessfully, to lay the blame and so on at the president's doorstep or at a particular party's doorstep, and to make all of this into something that only the PPP Civic is responsible for. So my problem is not with people calling for local government elections or wanting it or advocating for it, however that advocacy is carried out. It is this foreign service person who has no business getting involved in our country's domestic affairs except in a general broad sense that stays within the norms and conventions of how diplomats relate with foreign countries when those countries are sovereign countries. My problem is with this ambassador going outside of all of that and believing that he's perhaps the father of the opposition parties or the father of the opposition to the government, and trying to lead that by denigrating our president, mocking the General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party Civic, and really calling for an insurrection in this country, which is going to be harmful to all of our people, not just the political party in office. It's going to be harmful to this lovely country we call Guyana. And so that's that's the problem we have with his behavior and his actions. The other issues, and that's why I say to people, pause a second and think about what the issues really are. Brush off all the periphery and all the other decorations and ornaments that have been thrown onto this issue. And what are the issues? And so I'd like to ask, for anybody complaining about what I said, I mean, there are people who might not like my tone or didn't like what I wear or didn't like my hairstyle, whatever. Get over that. What did I say? What did the government say? What did the executive say on the night of July 2nd that you can take issue with? What in that statement is untrue? What is wrong about what we said? Tell us that, and we would be happy if you can point out something untrue. Is it not true that Ambassador Hardt has been meddling? Is it not true that we have repeatedly spoken to him? Is it not true that he has crossed the line of diplomacy? Is it not true that, should we not now say what our tolerance level is? Don't we have that duty, that responsibility? And perhaps you can blame us for not saying it before. We should have said this before. We should have said before, maybe one could justifiably argue, that you should have told him last year, here, Ambassador, this is our red line and you're very close to this red line. Maybe we should have said it then. But I'd like people to say, when you get over all the other things, what is it we said that wasn't true? And when you can tell us that, let's start examining the issues like that. Get over all, I mean, the people who, the political parties and so on, who've thrown their weight in, and some of the other people commenting and so on, their comments are not surprising. So I'm not surprised by any of it. I'm quite enjoying some of the discussions I see, because in some of those discussions, even though you might have personally derogatory things aimed at me or somebody else in the government, I'm seeing an opening up of a discussion that needs to happen. Where is the line that diplomats should stand behind at all times, should never cross? What is our relationship with the U.S.? How did we get to this place with the U.S.? I'm seeing that discussion happening on social media, and when people talk to me, in the last 2 days when people have been talking to me and so on, and that for me is beautiful. So, we are not apologizing. We're not sorry at all that we spoke. I mean, we wished that the ambassador didn't launch his attack on President Ramatar on Monday. We wish that he did not denigrate and laugh at Clement Rohi or the General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party, and in effect laugh at all the people who have worked their entire lives in that party and who now support and work for that party. And we wish he didn't do that. We wish he did not call the president and the people of Guyana illegal, non-constitutional. And we wish, too, that on the night of the 2nd, he did not ask Guyana to rise up as the U.S. rose up. Very different circumstances, but we wish that he didn't do that. And if he didn't do that, then we would have been able to say Ambassador Hardt has been wonderful. He's helped us in the security sector, which he has, and we must acknowledge him for that. And he's been a great ambassador, and we love you dearly, and we will miss you. And please return to Guyana and Habs, because we hope that during this time you have had our black water and our lava and We wish we could have done that on the night of the 2nd, but he didn't. he just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and the government would have been negligent in its duty to the people of Guyana if we did not respond. And so we did.
Thank you very much, Honorable Priya Manickchand, the Minister of Education, currently executing the duties of Foreign Affairs Minister, and Madam Gail Teixeira, Presidential Advisor on Governance, and of course the Chief Whip of the government in the National Assembly. I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I think we've had a very fruitful discussion, and quite a number of issues were clarified surrounding what happened on the evening of Wednesday, July 2, but more so what led to what happened on that evening and all the issues that accumulated leading up to those events. Again, thank you very much, and I want to thank you very much for joining us at home.
Thank you very much.
Eddie.